Hello everybody and welcome to another GameXplain discussion. I am Dan and I'm joined by Adam.
Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Dan?
I'm good, very good. Today we're talking about Advance Wars 1 plus 2 Reboot Camp. Well, specifically about 60 missions of the first game. Is that right?
Exactly.
We cannot talk about basically anything else, so we cannot talk about the multiplayer, we cannot talk about Black Hole Rising, which has different mechanics than the first game. The first game, I would say, is a bit more straightforward in terms of mechanics. For someone who doesn't know anything about Advance Wars, could you give us the basic rundown of what it's like and what you do in the game?
So basically, Advance Wars is... Well, it was a game that came out on the Game Boy Advance, and now it's obviously being ported to Switch with new graphics and all that. But So basically, it's a strategy game, and you have different units. So you have different infantry units, different tanks, different aerial units, and naval units as well. And they're these kind of pretty small maps. They're pretty cute looking, actually, and the graphics are nice. And you basically just either have to capture the enemy's base, take out all of their units, or there are some that have win conditions that you have to capture X amount of bases. Say, like, you have to capture 12 bases before they capture 12 bases. And then that's how you win them. So that's the basic rundown. And in the game, different units are stronger against other units. And then there's also different types of terrain. So you have, like, forests that give you, I think, like 1 or 2 star defense. And then mountains give you, like, 3 or 4 star defense. And if you place your unit on a city, they get better defense as well.
Yeah. I would say that compared to, say, a Fire Emblem game, which I'm slightly more into, but I still enjoy those very much. Fire Emblem is very involved with its units, and you feel outside of your commander, you feel more detached from the whole experience, and you're basically using resources to build up new ones. I don't think they changed anything like in the basic rundown, because you just gave a basic rundown of what the game is like. I don't imagine they've changed much in the remake of the first game, have they?
So my experience with the first one was quite limited. I played it at like a friend's house when I was really young on the Game Boy Advanced, and I was way too young to understand what was going on, so my knowledge is quite limited.
Yeah.
But I did watch gameplay just to kind of catch myself up, and it looks like everything is pretty much the same.
Yes. Okay. So for people who don't know, so basically, like I said, you're detached. So basically, you just make units, go to the different points in the map, you take over buildings, you try to take advantage of the location and environment, try to defeat your opponents on the map, or try to charge to the base as quickly as possible, whatever, like, you feel better. In your experience with about the first 16 missions of the game, did you feel like you still got a good grasp of the mechanics? I feel that in the original, it kind of, some stuff really glided you by, and there was a decent tutorial in the game, but like some elements were very much glanced over in the grand scheme of things.
So I think the tutorial system is quite good, actually. So how it works is, at the start of certain missions, Nell, who is one of the characters, she's kind of like the person in the chair, kind of, that, you know, looks after all the comms and stuff. So she comes over the mic and she'll explain to you basically, oh, do you understand what a naval unit is when you're first introduced to them?
Okay.
And then you can either say yes or no. And then if you say yes, you'll be like, okay, well, this is a battleship. If you grab the battleship, you can shoot people off in the distance. They're all too good for this. And then it's like, here's a submarine. If submarines can submerge underwater, so certain units can't attack them. And they actually, as you go along in the game, they do a really good job, actually, at the start of drip feeding you all the new units so that you don't get overwhelmed. Because if the first 2 or 3 missions was you had naval, air, like, and then just tanks and stuff driving around, it would have been too much. But in this, they drip feed you the new units and then explain at the start of whatever mission that you got them first, explain how to use them and what they're best at. And even like the first 2 missions introduce the idea of different terrains and how they affect it, and how to capture bases. So like It's very accessible, and it's really easy to get into. Now the game is still quite difficult, as I'd imagine the original was. There's two difficulties. There's casual, and then the harder difficulty, whatever it could be called, normal or hard. I forget the name of it, but I've played mostly on casual, and I've done maybe like 5 or 6 missions I've went back to do on the hard difficulty. And regardless of the difficulty, the game is still quite tough. And the first couple of missions on the casual difficulty, I was thinking, oh, this is a bit kind of boring. But then I did them on the hard difficulty. It was like, oh, okay. And also, one thing that kind of surprised me about the game is that usually in these kind of strategy games, I kind of really go like all out, just all out attack, push all my units up, create a nice big barrier, and then just destroy them. But in this game, because of how you capture bases, and if you put a unit that is damaged on a base, they will recharge their health. I think it's 2 HP every single turn. The game almost kind of encourages you to play the game a bit more defensively, which is something that, to be honest, I'm not really used to. Like, when it comes to strategy games I've played, it's more kind of Mario and Rabbids and XCOM, and them games are definitely a bit more like, you know, just run into the fray and just take them out as quick as possible. Whereas this, it took me a while. I was dying a lot because I was trying to be too offensive. And now that I'm learning, it's like, okay, it's actually okay to retreat a unit and to just let it recharge for 2 or 3 moves and kind of set myself up so that, oh, there's a bridge here. Oh, well, then I'm going to get my medium tank. I'm going to place it on the bridge so that they can't get in. And then I'll put artillery behind it, so if anyone does try to push that bridge, the medium tank can deal with them, and then also the artillery, which has range, can then deal with them as well.
Yeah. I think that, so the original game was obviously made by Intelligent Systems. I think Intelligent Systems are like kings in making you think defensively. So I feel with Advance Wars, you can, in certain situations, if you play it like quite well, you can basically let that go a little bit. It's just basically just a build up that requires you to do that. Especially if you have more buildings in your like possession as you cross through the game, you basically have multiple positions where you can basically attack from, and then you become a bit overpowered, I feel. But I don't know how you feel about that in your personal experience with the game.
I don't understand the game well enough. Again, I've only played the first 16 missions, so I don't understand the inner workings of the mechanics about like how to kind of break the game. I'm sure it can be broken. I mean, most of these games can be. And I've actually seen some YouTube channels that are like completely dedicated to Advanced Wars. And it's crazy. I didn't even know any of this existed. And no, I didn't feel like the game could be broken so far. But I can see that the game is giving me a nice ramp up in difficulty so far. Like, the game is hard from the start. And as I keep going on, there, like, you know, I'll be like, oh, this is kind of getting a bit easy. Maybe I'll bump up the difficulty, and then bam, some mission will come in. I'm like, oh, that absolutely destroyed me. And then that's when I kind of have to start thinking more defensive. Like, there was one mission where basically there's only 2 parts of the map where your units can move out because it's all blocked by mountains. And in that mission, I pushed all my units past the mountain and got absolutely destroyed. But then, like, I think I got destroyed twice, and then I sat there, I was like, I think it's time to play a bit defensive. So then I sat back behind the mountain, and then everything was fine.
Yeah. I mean, also the key difference between the first and the second game, and obviously we cannot discuss anything that happens in the second game, is that you have more options and powers to your overall procedure. While here, you're basically required to play it out correctly with your units and push yourself a little bit forward here and there. Is there any particular mission that was your standout so far?
I think it was that mission that I just mentioned. Where,
okay, fair enough.
Where it was that was the changing point. Where before that I was kind of, oh, I'm getting absolutely destroyed, and why is this mission so hard? And then that was the one, even though the game actually told me multiple times, like, it's okay to retreat your units, but I was like, nah, I'm not into that. And then that one mission, I was like, oh, well, the game is clearly trying to tell me this is a good position to hold. And outside of the mountain, they had these, I think they're missiles So it's basically a car that has missiles on the back and it has a massive range. So it basically just covers the ground where, oh, I can't move a tank into there. So then the game taught me there again. It's like, look, you have a mountain. And then on the other side of the mountain is something that can shoot you from any distance and you can't close the gap. So just sit back. And to be honest, I'm actually surprised. Like I'm really happy about how good the game is at teaching me how to play it.
That's good. Yeah, there were moments, there were spikes, and I still feel those spikes are there where you kind of overpowered a little bit. But it's at least good to hear that the game... So there was like sort of a training round with different missions where the game would explain you in the original game. But sometimes I felt like it went a bit too fast, but it sounds like they tweaked that a little bit to ensure that players at least get to know the mechanics a little bit better, which is good to hear. Speaking of differences, so this game has a completely different art style from the original game. So obviously you can clearly see it, even though you didn't have full experience with the original game. How do you feel about how the art style looks, especially with the change of the maps, with the 3D graphics and everything?
I think they look really good. So I'd say like the weakest part, so we'll just start, like I think the weakest part is probably the units. They're still good, they pop, they're very colourful and the maps are very colourful. But some of the units have this weird sort of glossy look to them that I personally don't like. It almost makes it look like they're toys. Which is just not how I envision this game being. Like, I don't envision this being like someone looking over a board with a load of toys playing, but maybe that's what they were going for. But that's what it seems like to me. But then the rest of the aesthetic of this game is so good. The cutscenes, the little intro cutscene, and then all the animations for all the CO's kind of special moves, and just how expressive they are, and how expressive they are even when they're talking. And it's almost, it really, what the kind of story and presentation of this game reminds me of is like an obscure Cartoon Network cartoon that was like released in the late 90s, early 2000s that I would have watched and I would have loved. And then 15 years later when I'm talking about it, I'm saying, oh, do you remember that cartoon? People are like, no, I've never heard of that cartoon. And nobody knows it. But that's what it's giving me. And just the whole package, like how it looks is great. In general, I said the units, are a bit hit or miss. But the rest of the UI and then just the rest of how expressive the characters are, they did a really good job at reimagining it.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention the individual like units looking like toys. I wonder if that's what they're going for, because I always get the feeling from the kind of strategy games that like Intelligent Systems or like now I guess Way Forward like tries to replicate is that they're trying to present it a little bit like toys, like little bit of things on a playing field, because basically the grid is your playing field. But I can see the opposite argument on that for sure. Like I said like a few times now, so this game is far more detached than say a Fire Emblem, but do you still feel like there is like proper characterization for the characters? Do you feel like there's a plot there? How do you personally feel about like the story in Advance Wars?
So I don't want to go into it too much. Again, I haven't beaten it, but again, it's that sort of, it feels like a cartoon. I love all the characters. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say the story is, will blow your socks off and all that, but it's they all just have very distinct personalities. And usually in a game like this, I would be skipping through all the dialogue, just completely ignoring it. Like, just give me the gameplay. Like, I'll listen to a podcast and I'll play it. But here at the start of the levels and at the end, I'm actually listening and like reading what they have to say. And the voice acting is really strong as well. Unfortunately, it does that thing, where the first, say, 5-6 sentences or 5-6 words of a sentence will be voice acted, and then the rest of it won't be voice acted. Mario and Rabbids did the same, and it's a shame because the voice acting is actually really good, and I wish all of it was voice acted, because the characters themselves are they're really endearing, and again they just kind of feel like cartoon characters basically.
I was about to say, the voice acting is new, but what it sounds like is that it's kind of only halfway when it comes to voice acting, kind of like Mario plus Rabbids. That's a bit disappointing.
Yeah, it is.
Oh man. So the conclusion basically is there is characterization, especially with the voice acting, but the amount there really is feels kind of limiting.
Yeah.
So we've been rambling a lot, I think, for the last 15 minutes. Is there anything we haven't discussed, or any general thoughts that you still want to get out there?
No, I think I've covered pretty much everything. Like, just sort of as like the outro conclusion to this. They did a really good job at recreating sort of the aesthetic of it. Again, I said that they kind of look a bit like toys, but that could have been what they were going for, and if so, they did a good job at that. And then all the characters are well fleshed out, and the animations are beautiful too. And then, honestly, I think the main takeaway from this, since we can't talk about too much about the game, is that as someone who has very limited knowledge and very limited history with the series, it's a really good way to get into it because of how good the tutorials are at teaching you how everything is done.
Sounds good. Alright, I think Advance Wars 1+2 Re-Bootcamp comes out on, what is it, like the end of this month, like the 28th, was it? Or the 28th?
I believe it's like April 21st.
21st, okay, very good.
If not, I'll fix that in editing, it'll be on the screen somewhere.
So yeah, it will be out on April 21st. We'll likely have a review before that game comes out, so stay tuned for that. Either case, keep it locked to GameXplain for more on Advance Wars and other things gaming as well. Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.